This is the Baunfire Gaming Podcast, episode 341. I'm your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about Dragon Age the Veilguard development info, PlayStation's Hulst, confident about Marathon, developer trashes Game Pass deal that they signed up for, and much more. So I just returned from a week's vacation. We actually went down to Clearwater Beach, Florida. It was a good time. It was fun. We take a week every summer to go somewhere. We have a young daughter. My wife is a teacher, so she gets summers off with her setup. And I have a lot of flexibility with my schedule and things like that. So it was a ton of fun. We had a blast. It was perfect weather while we were down there. We stayed in a really nice hotel. Spent a lot of time on the beach. Spent a lot of time eating some really, really good food. I don't think we had a single bad meal. We had a couple of meals that were like fine, but we had was like Little Anthony's Pizza down there. It was super, super good. There was a handful of places. The worst experience we had was the first night because our flight was 2 hours late. Our daughter was exhausted, and we should not have tried to go out to eat with her. I should have went and just grabbed food and brought it back. But the food that we grabbed and we waited forever for, that kind of sucked. It ended up being really, really, really good. It just took forever to get. But it was fine. We recovered pretty quickly that night and had a good time. One thing that was interesting, and it always is when we do these trips, is it means that I spend a week not entirely disconnected from the gaming conversation and stuff like that, but definitely less connected. We often go around the same time as all of the showcases with Summer Game Fest and Xbox Showcase and so on and so forth. So it's always interesting for me because, I spend 90 to 95% less time paying attention to that stuff. So when I do, it's always very shocking. And it reminds me of, well, if I was at home and I saw this article or this tweet or this video, my reaction would be this or that, to make my own video, to make a sassy post or whatever. And it's not to say I didn't do that while on vacation. But I also had many moments of having that first instinct to see something and be like, oh, come on. And then to just not care because I'm sitting on a beach with a drink in my hand and I've got my family with me. We're just hanging out. And it just put things into perspective a bit. And it does every year. And I really appreciate those trips for that. It's not to say I don't enjoy giving my commentary on things. So a few dozen people can hear what I think about stuff. But I've definitely, especially as I've been getting older, started to realize that it's good to take information in. It may be better to not worry so much about responding to people. To definitely, I gave up years ago trying to convince anyone of anything. I think even if you're listening to this podcast, I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm not here to honestly even influence you. I'm just here to tell you what I'm seeing from other people, to do the best I can to give a relatively balanced take on things I'm seeing around, and to give my take. Maybe that can be informative. Maybe it can be, a way of giving you a take you wouldn't have heard otherwise or something like that. I don't know. But I've definitely, taken the time on these trips to take a step back, see what people are saying, maybe take it in, but maybe not always feel like I have to respond, even though my post history may not indicate that. More than anything, it's just become a thing where I'm pretty disheartened or disenchanted, or I don't really know what the right word is, with really taking anyone else's take seriously. It feels like most of the regular, quote unquote, regular people that you see posting on social media are basically just parroting things they've heard from other people. Those other people are often influencers and content creators. And honestly, I would unfortunately even throw most quote unquote games journalists into this, where they're just kind of saying the thing that will get the most clicks, get them the most notoriety, get the crowd to cheer because, we can't talk about how one platform is doing stuff really bad, but the other one's always doing bad, even if it doesn't appear to actually be doing bad. Um, it's just so many influencers and stuff are so predictable at this point for me. I feel like we can see a game that's coming out or some announcement from a platform or something, and you can name me like five content creators or influencers or journalists, and I could give you their takes on that stuff without even reading a single word from them, and then they give their take and it's exactly what you expected. It's almost every time, and being that predictable, and, maybe it's consistency, but my issue is that it's often predictable in the sense of it's always going to be depending on what platform is being talked about, or what game or what publisher or whatever, based on the individual or the group that you're thinking about. It's, to me, it just seems pretty easy to be like, oh yeah, so and so is going to think that, so and so is going to say this, and that just becomes kind of boring. When you consume content and you already feel like you know what's going to be said, I guess it just kind of ruins it a little bit, especially because the predictability comes from outlets being afraid to offend a certain publisher or platform, or outlets trying to stoke, sensational stories about certain platforms or whatever. So the time away is really nice. I'm happy to be back. I'm happy to be recording another episode of the podcast. We have a lot to talk about today, and I would like to get into it. So let's do that. Okay, getting into the gaming news. On the last episode, I covered all of the showcases, PlayStation, Summer Game Fest, and Xbox. Talked about all of that. I'm not aware that any huge things broke over the last week since those shows happened. There was some maybe sort of kind of leaks that maybe we might have pricing for the Xbox hardware, and then there's also rumors, which we'll get to in a little bit, about their first party hardware. But what I want to open it up with is a topic that I'm actually going to make a video about separate from this, where I'll spend a little more time or be a little more focused on it. But Jason Schreier of Bloomberg had a big write up about, depending on the title you saw, I swear it changed multiple times, about the tumultuous development story of Dragon Age: The Veilguard, and how that's impacted EA, BioWare, and the upcoming Mass Effect game. So I'm not going to sit here and read the whole article. I'm not even going to summarize every point, mostly because there wasn't, as far as I can tell, and I could be proven wrong, there was nothing new in this whole article. Now, to a lot of people, a lot of the info probably was new. I don't think everyone is as focused on BioWare or EA or the Dragon Age team or the Mass Effect team, like someone like I am, or other content creators who kind of focus on this part of the gaming sphere, right? But none of this info was new. I will say that some of the info that we got seems like it was maybe from a different angle, from different people in the company. But, if you follow the BioWare devs or former BioWare devs, if you've paid attention to the articles, if you've just watched what's been happening, I didn't think any of this was new. And it was kind of strange to me that it was presented as like this hard hitting takedown of what happened. I especially thought it was pretty pretty low quality, and kind of uninteresting for considering Jason Schreier's history. He is someone who, while I can't stand him as an individual, I will give him credit that I would argue he's basically the only real games journalist. But it is annoying that he's human, and it definitely seems like there's a few subjects or publishers or studios or games that he just can't be objective with, and often decides to throw his own opinions in. So, uh, some points in the article that were made, talking about how BioWare was given a short time to actually complete the game after EA approved them, removing the multiplayer element. This comes from a long history with Dragon Age of the Veilguard for roughly almost, about 10 years almost, where they essentially rebooted the game that became Veilguard multiple times. And I'm under the impression from this article and from other things that we've heard that final reboot really only happened a few years ago. And the developers, BioWare, people there were trying to tell EA, like, hey, if you don't want us to make this a multiplayer game, which we've been working on for years now, we need to like kind of start from scratch. And basically it sounds like they weren't allowed to do that, or they weren't given the time to do it, and they had to kind of try to reconfigure this multiplayer game into the game that we eventually played as Dragon Age the Veilguard. I will say from my own experience, you can definitely tell there's things in the game, there's places in the game that were obviously supposed to be like a multiplayer hub. The just the home base in the Veil, the castle or whatever that you unlock parts of, and all that pretty obviously seems like it was supposed to be a shared player space and like a multiplayer game. It still works in the single player game, but things like that, you can definitely tell that that seems legit. One of the more interesting parts that we knew, but maybe we didn't know as much detail, is that the team working on pre-production for Mass Effect, the next game, was brought over like entirely. And probably the closest thing we can see the new information is that they came over and basically took over development of Dragon Age. There's a long history between what used to be two separate teams at BioWare. That was a Dragon Age team and a Mass Effect team. There was also the Star Wars MMO team, but they were kind of separate down in Austin. But this Dragon Age Mass Effect, there's always been a rivalry. It sounds like, we've read about this in the past, but this kind of reinforced that. And it sounds like basically there was a lot of tension where a lot of the Dragon Age developers, like the leads and the people, like the directors and stuff like that, kind of got squeezed out, and the Mass Effect team basically took over, and that was reinforced by BioWare and EA. That also seems like it resulted in some of the tone issues. If you played the game, it takes itself very seriously at times. It definitely doesn't in others. And there's also, it's presumed that the final act of the game, which is very reminiscent of Mass Effect 2's suicide mission, it definitely seems like there was a lot of Mass Effect influence on the final act of Veilguard, because it's, for all intents and purposes, another suicide mission based on choices and things that you decide to do before the final act and during. You can lose companions, and that influence is pretty obvious from the Mass Effect team. During feedback, I believe it was pre-alpha playthroughs where they had the game playable from start to finish, and they were sending out to various people in EA, on various teams and things like that. There was a lot of feedback that the kind of juvenile tone and unserious tone caused a lot of issues and a lot of concern. And that Mass Effect team, it sounds like, put in a lot of rewrites and things like that. Now the problem is that this was during the writer's strike, toward the end of development, or the voice actor strike, which is still technically ongoing. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So they weren't able to just straight up re-record most of the lines. Therefore, they had to kind of rejigger what they had, and this is what seems to be the blame, at least partially, for the very kind of strange and inconsistent tone that happens throughout the game, which is something I've noted, as well as a lot of other people. It seems like, and we've seen this from the investor calls and stuff like that EA was happy with the reviews and reception of Veilguard, but they were not happy with the sales, them being about half of what they were hoping for, which was already kind of a low number, it seems like. I still, and I didn't like this part of Shire's article where he kind of poo-pooed the FC25 failure. We've seen evidence since then that Veilguard was never expected to really make much money, if any, really. And I've been saying that for years, that I am under the impression it just seems like EA was just trying to get this game out, and so that they can move on to other stuff with BioWare and so on. And that the FC25 revenue failure was like a huge deal, especially when you remember that at least at one time, FIFA or FC was like 50+% of EA's revenue. So if, even if, say, Veilguard only sold half of what they expected, that impact on EA is literal pennies compared to if FC25 came in 5% under what they were hoping for. And I still feel like that conversation isn't really happening. And I felt like Schreier's article, and when he talked about it, really kind of swept that under the rug of FC25 was significantly the bigger failure here. And Veilguard, I think, and to this day, I still believe, was used as kind of a scapegoat. But, maybe I'm wrong. And then it kind of wrapped up talking about how BioWare has dozens of devs working on Mass Effect currently as it continues in pre-production. So here's my takes on the article and some of the things I saw. This felt like a low effort hit piece, in my opinion, by Schreier, and he's done this before with like the Anthem Andromeda times, and there was like news to put out about that. He brought out a lot of revelations during that time that kind of explained what happened with Andromeda and Anthem and stuff like that. This isn't that. Maybe it's just a different time or whatever. Maybe it's just my own personal knowledge. But the things in this article, you could have found basically all this information for months at this point. And he just compiled it. Now, maybe that's the point. I don't know. But so many, just the way that he worded things, it was very obviously meant to make this seem as bad as possible. Where someone who's paid attention to this stuff really closely for years at this point, I have a different take on it. We'll get into that. I thought the best, the capping this article off at the end with this industry and analyst saying, "Oh, I wouldn't be surprised if BioWare shuts down any day." Like just some guy at some analyst firm, and sure, I'm sure those things have value, but it was so transparent, at least to me, of like him just wanting to put that final dagger in and twist it at the end of the article. I thought it was extremely cheesy and lame, and just really beneath him. I may or may not have said something to that effect on social media, and and he blocked me, which is fine. He's like one of the Schreier is a very good journalist most of the time, but that man cannot take anyone disagreeing with him. One of my favorite examples of that was back in the day of he put out an article at one point. I think it was during the Andromeda Anthem time of like, the Mass Effect may be shuttered forever. And this was not long before Mass Effect Will Continue was announced, right? And so many people, especially on the Mass Effect subreddit, I assume, we're talking about it being clickbait and all of that. That he literally made a Reddit post in the subreddit, basically chastising people for claiming he was putting out clickbait, which to me is just like, oh, so it's clickbait. But maybe that's just my take on it. This dude doesn't handle criticism well. He doesn't handle any kind of pushback well. If you've ever seen interviews with him and stuff like that, I mean, he's earned his place. He's earned his voice, obviously. And I don't need to say that, but he is like the most pretentious person in game, coverage. And it shows, and examples like this, I think are good ones to point at, where that even the people at the top of the game, you still need to be somewhat skeptical about, because they may not be doing things completely legitimately. It was really interesting how the whole putting all this together. The Veilguard developers, the people who worked on that game, especially the frontline people, it really seems like they tried to make their best game. I truly believe that. And I think they mostly succeeded. There's definitely the writing isn't great all the time. A lot of it kind of sucks. A few of the characters to me were pretty unbearable, and it wasn't for weird Gunner issues. It was just because I just like one of the characters, Tosh. A lot of people hate this character because they're non-binary. The way it's presented in the game is pretty obnoxious. It's just not very. It felt so forced and fake. I don't care that her character was non-binary. That was perfectly fine with me. Um, no problems at all. I genuinely could not care less about that. I thought it was cool that they tried. The problem is that the execution was really bad, and it didn't help that no matter what, you know, identification Tosh had as a character, their writing and just the lines they had were so awful and so unbearable. It was they wrote them like they were like a 12-year-old, and it just they were just grating, and it had nothing to do with the subject. It was literally just the lines that were written. Um, and that's a bummer because the game, like I said, the final act is incredible. Technically, I would argue that the Veilguard's one of the best games made in a couple decades. I experienced no bugs, no major crashes or issues like that. I can't remember any big instances of any quests being bugged or anything like that. The wrong model showing up, seeing a T pose in the background. I had none of those issues. It performed really, really well on console. I just, I I think even if someone didn't like the game, the content of the game, I still think it's a huge bummer that it didn't get more credit for just being well made, for not having microtransactions in it, for not having, DLC that was day one and all this stuff. They literally made the game that people have been asking for years. It's just unfortunately for a lot of people, the actual content didn't live up. There's also this kind of weird situation where I'm someone who doesn't really like Dragon Age. I've never played Origins or Dragon Age 2. I did not like. So yeah, I don't know, man. It was the whole thing was really interesting about the leadership issues. It sounds like there was a lot of criticism that maybe the original Dragon Age team that was leading things wasn't doing a very good job, that there was issues, especially with the narrative, and that this is hard for me because I've like interacted with some of these people. They've been super nice, super thankful for my, excitement about the game and stuff like that. And I don't believe anyone wakes up and goes to work and says, I'm going to do a bad job today. Like, I just think that maybe people aren't properly experienced. Maybe people aren't properly put in the right spot for positions and things like that. And maybe sometimes people kind of like the smells of their own farts too much. And I think it's really interesting, and especially amongst their community and some of the people who are no longer there. It was really interesting seeing a lot of reaction to this stuff of like taking no ownership for me, where the blame is always just, oh, EA bad, and EA is bad. Andrew Wilson sucks. EA does a bunch of stuff that sucks. Like, I'm not here to defend EA, I assure you, but I will also say that I've seen a lot of belly aching and a lot of people who were in charge of stuff, and sure, they didn't have enough time or enough resources or enough budget or whatever. And that's what happens with every game almost, unless except like Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead. Like every other game never has enough time or money, right? And it seems like in the writing being a big one, like I'm newer to this BioWare fandom, specifically Mass Effect. And for me, I saw over these last few years when these like veteran writers are being let go and stuff like that, people who were, like fan favorites because they wrote some of their favorite characters and so on. These people would be let go or they would quit and leave or whatever. And there would be this, like complete meltdown by a lot of fans and stuff. And to me, as someone newer, all I could think about was like, well, like, arguably the worst part of their most recent game was the thing they did and it was not great. It was extremely inconsistent, and I've seen very little, discussion of them being like, yeah, maybe we could have done this or done that. I've just basically seen blaming of everyone else, and that, I don't know, it's just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I'm never going to be happy about someone losing their job or having to find a new one or whatever. But there is a point where if you don't do a good job, that no matter, how well you've done over the last 20 years, that, maybe your services aren't wanted anymore by that place if it's not working anymore. Um, I really, and I've harped on this before, but man, this Schreier article really pissed me off when I saw, of course, our favorite BioWare commentator, David Gator, or whatever his name is, who literally hasn't been there for like 20 years or something, or 10 years. He's had his own studio for years at this point, which who knows what games they're making. Apparently, they've released one and they're about to release one. So if you ever wonder why Gator pops up all the time, he knows the best way for him to probably advertise his new game is to talk about BioWare. It's just every time this guy talks, it's just moaning and groaning about how EA, preferred the Mass Effect team over. He's one of the main writers for Dragon Age through its entire franchise until he left. Um, it's just always whining about how EA always preferred the Mass Effect team and this and that. Oh, Dragon Age sold more copies. Well, look in the Metacritic scores, and for a long time, that's what mattered. You won't find many Dragon Age titles in BioWare's top 10 or top 20. It's almost all Mass Effect properties. So maybe there's a thing there. But he was quoted in this article. I'm pretty sure he was just speculating about how the Dragon Age team wasn't getting any support from EA. Then when the Mass Effect team came over and basically took the reins of development of the Veilguard over, that they got everything they wanted, which contradicts the other things that were in this article about how they didn't get enough time after the final reboot of the game. Again, it's messy. I think this was a very low tier article from someone who we assume typically sources and explains their articles really well. I just, for me, I do think it's just kind of tough because I just feel like there's been very little ownership taken over the things that were bad. And the problem is that, and I've seen, unfortunately, a lot of people doing it who were involved or in the community of being like, well, all of the weirdos destroyed the conversation around Veilguard. The people being weird about Tosh being non-binary, the people being weird about, gay romances or lesbian romances or this or that thing, this culture war stuff that was awful around this game. Don't get me wrong. It was really annoying and terrible. It's not why the game failed, at least from EA's perspective. That stuff doesn't help. But I also think that we really, especially us, like really connected people into the gaming sphere who probably pay too much attention to this stuff. I don't think that we realize just how little broad impact these people have. The God, I even saw some people in the Mass Effect community or in the BioWare community being like, IGN has no relevance and people like Asmongold do. And it's like, come on, man. Like the normies still care about IGN. And just because there's a vocal minority, and it's I'm not by minority, I don't mean a small number. There's obviously, unfortunately, a lot of people who watch Asmongold and all these other losers and pay attention to them, but they don't speak for the general gamer. And like it or not, a website like IGN does more so than say one of those kind of right wing kind of grifter influencers, even though it may not feel like it, just because of the atmosphere that we're typically in. I don't think that Grums or Asmongold is why Dragon Age the Veilguard failed. I think it failed because it had been a decade since the last game had come out. It had all these issues that we've discussed with writing and tone and I saw someone complain about the combat. I love the combat. I think that was great. I feel like it could have evolved a bit more as the game wore on, but I definitely don't understand that being a criticism. But that's neither here nor there. I think it failed because they I thought the marketing was there was a lot of marketing. I definitely don't think the Game Informer situation helped, where Game Informer shut down in the middle of what seemed to be their biggest campaign for the game. I just I just don't think it connected. And more than anything, I think the lack of fan service for like old school Dragon Age fans was a bigger hit than even I thought it was going to be. I was very much of the opinion, oh no, they need to target like new players like me, essentially. They need to target people who aren't just Dragon Age fans because it's been a decade since the last game. A lot of gamers today never played the old Dragon Age games, maybe Inquisition, but probably not. And I think they did a good job of that. I felt targeted, and I enjoyed the Veilguard a ton. But it seems like there are plenty of Dragon Age fans who like the game, but most of the ones I interact with, and it seems like a lot of the more hardcore ones, it seems like it didn't do a great job of making them feel like they were playing the next game in a series that was beloved to them. It seemed like to a lot of them, they just kind of made another game that happened to be a Dragon Age game. And that just wasn't all that enticing to a lot of existing players or new players. And that's when we see a game that is very technically sound not end up being very financially successful. And that's a bummer because there's a lot of things that the Veilguard did that we should hope more games do in the future. And a game like that, on paper failing, for lack of a better term, makes that fight to get some of those good, consumer friendly choices in future games. With the Mass Effect team, it seems like in a lot of ways they kind of saved the Veilguard from being a straight up maybe kind of bad game to being a game that I think in general people felt like was pretty good, if not the best. It was interesting, some of this article talking about how some big decisions that were made during the Veilguard between leadership, those meetings just straight up didn't include Dragon Age leadership. It was just between people at EA and BioWare and Mass Effect from that team, which I found to be kind of interesting. Who knows how true all of that is or to what degree it was happening. It does kind of seem like EA/BioWare basically dispatched the Mass Effect team to come, quote unquote, fix the Veilguard for however much it could. We also know they were only there during the last, about year of development. So it's not like they were there for 3 or 4 years. They were there for 18 months max. I just it's been interesting for me to see people just instantly being like, oh, EA bad or whatever, instead of acknowledging like, oh, maybe, maybe after almost 10 years, or 8 or 9 years or whatever, maybe the way things were going at Dragon Age weren't great. I mean, I just, for me, most of the stuff that we're seeing, it just seems like the result of a studio in evolution, right? The moves made by EA, the moves made by BioWare seem like they're going from a studio that used to make 5-6 games at a time and down to 2 or 3 to a studio that makes 1 game at a time. That's going to be, all the corpo speak, more agile and more flexible or whatever they said during all these different layoffs. And I think that's okay. I don't think the day the Insomniacs, the Oblivions, or the Obsidians are not normal nowadays, especially not under third party ownership. We likely aren't going to see a ton of studios making 2 or 3 games at a time anymore. And I think we're seeing BioWare become a studio that's going to work on 1 game at a time. And there's a pretty solid chance that, at least currently, Dragon Age is probably a dead franchise. And that sucks. It shouldn't be for those fans. But it kind of seems like realistically that might be the situation. I don't blame the fans for being mad about that and being bitter, but it really is frustrating to see fans and honestly even some big influencers being, for lack of a better term, kind of brain dead about this stuff. Not even considering why this stuff would be happening for reasons, right? Not even giving a moment to consider that, you know, we don't like EA. I think we all agree on that. Andrew Wilson blows, right? But when you look at these situations, if you look at them purely emotionally and reaction wise, then you're never gonna have like a good take on this stuff. And I'm not even saying I have a good take on these things, but I do think that whether you like it or not, you have to look at these things as the meanderings of a giant corporation led by people who are focused on making money. And that's what kind of sucks about games, right? Gaming is one of the art forms where the people who make the money and the creatives are closer than maybe any other industry, and that means that the pain is felt by them more directly. And we've been seeing that for years, for the entirety of gaming history, but especially recently. I just think that a lot of the takes are funny when people are just like, I saw someone, I think it was on Threads, be like, this article really sours me on EA. Like, one, if this is what turned you against EA, then you have not been paying attention on anything. Like, you have not paid attention to anything ever that EA has done, because of all the things they've done, them see giving almost 10 years of development and seemingly eternal patience with this game before it came out, while they almost certainly knew it wasn't going to do well. That isn't a bad thing, or at least not for it shouldn't be from a gamer's perspective. Them not just shutting down BioWare or shutting down this project, like this Dragon Age project probably should have been shut down multiple reboots before it even came out, but they didn't. They kept trying to make it happen, whether it was sunk cost or whether it was passion for the series. I don't know. It's probably sunk cost, but we've seen them shut down other stuff. If you pay attention to Respawn lately, they've canceled half the games they were working on, right? So they could have just canceled Dragon Age. They could have just shut BioWare down at any time in the last decade, and they haven't. Instead, they're evolving the studio. They let this Dragon Age game come out, even though it didn't seem like there was ever any hope it was going to be like a big seller or anything, even though I still think it's a pretty solid game. And they're seemingly continuing to see how they can make this work and to put out another game in one of their legendary franchises with Mass Effect. I just I don't know, like I'm not asking people to be fans of EA. It's perfectly fine to hate EA. Everyone should, honestly. But you gotta have a little nuance. You gotta have some thought. You gotta use your brain, and you can't just be purely reactionary, purely emotional about this stuff. You have to look at it and realize the fact that they're even trying to make another Mass Effect happen is honestly insane. I will say it seems like they're doing a bunch of stuff to try to make the next Mass Effect not have the same issues. They've seemingly are in the middle of a pretty big campaign to get Mass Effect back in the brain, back in the minds of people. There's an Amazon show that's in process of being made right now. We have the Legendary Edition came out. They allowed time and money to be spent to pretty lightly remaster the original trilogy, and that, for all intents and purposes, seems to have sold extremely well. It got people like me involved in the community. Like, it got me in, and I've been making content about Mass Effect ever since, right? So it worked, at least for me. And even now, just this in the last 24 hours that I'm talking about this, Battlefield 2042 is getting like a DLC for Mass Effect. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Mass Effect characters in Fortnite here in the next year or two. What I see this as, and people are I saw people are complaining, oh, they're wasting time making this Battlefield stuff instead of working on Mass Effect. I assure you, while it seems like BioWare was involved in that cosmetic deal, likely just on a consulting basis, that no one, I suspect no one at BioWare was making models for Battlefield. That was almost certainly one of the support teams that's been working on Battlefield 2042 for a long time. Maybe BioWare gave them some concept art or something. Who knows? But I see this as a pretty long term effort by EA and BioWare to get Mass Effect back in the minds of people. So when they start ramping up, development updates, when they start ramping up a marketing campaign for the next game, people will remember that the game exists, right? And even David Gator, the ultimate Dragon Age defender, has acknowledged, I believe, and other people have as well, that even though Mass Effect has sold less technically than the Dragon Age games, by the way, that was almost completely carried by Inquisition, which was just released at a very good time for them. I digress. It's Mass Effect has the mind share, and they seem to be trying to work on that now long before we'll see anything from uh, the actual game, which for all intents and purposes might be another like 5 years away. I have no idea at this point, but we'll have to wait and see. I'm really hoping that this 2025 we get a pretty substantial N7 day from BioWare. In theory, they will have been working on the game again for roughly a year, if not a bit more. Certainly, they would have at least a bunch of concept stuff, maybe some vertical slices, things like that, to give us for a big N7 day, especially when we got essentially nothing last year. So we'll have to wait and see. But I enjoy this conversation because I think it's a good deep dive into game development. It's just also very frustrating to me because I feel like the conversations around it are honestly pretty weak, but hopefully they get better. Herman Hulst of PlayStation is confident that Marathon will perform better than Concord. I don't know how it could go worse. I don't know how it could go worse than spending like $400 million on a studio and game and then shutting it down after a week. But I digress. This comes from them feeling like they're learning from their live service failures. I mean, they obviously aren't. It's such a hilarious thing for them to say or get into, or like the thing, what we saw from Marathon, this goofy, what's this other game that they've been working on? I forget what's the studio that Jade Raymond founded and now has left, that's working on Payday or something like that. No, that's a whole different series. Whatever it is, uh, it just seems like they're just going down the same path. So I don't really know like what they're doing. If I have to be totally honest, I have no clue. It doesn't seem like they know either. And we keep seeing it, like we had it with the PlayStation Showcase last week. Like they have Ghost of Yotei coming out. That's going to sell really well. It's going to review really well. People are going to love it. They have a third party exclusive and Death Stranding 2 coming soon. It's gonna get the fart smelling 99 out of 10 that it didn't get in the first game. But the things are different now. The fart smelling has commenced, and in that game, no matter how good or bad it is gonna get a 9 out of 10 from people. Like they have these games that are coming out, but we don't have a clue what like half of PlayStation Studios are doing. We know Naughty Dog is working on Intergalactic. Who knows about Santa Monica? Who knows about this other Naughty Dog project that they're supposedly working on? Who knows about, all of these, even Insomniac, we know that they were working on Wolverine and that a bunch of stuff got leaked from that a few years ago. And we've kind of heard nothing since. They have all these studios, Gorilla. We have no idea what they're working on. Another Horizon game or something different. We don't know. And it seems like, and I would argue pretty heavily, that what we don't know, why we don't know, is because they had each of these studios waste a bunch of time and resources on live service games that I believe have all been canceled at this point. I don't like, it's so strange. It's weird. It's weird. I talk about almost every week, so I won't harp on it too much here. But I don't know. Like, is Marathon going to be more successful in Concord? Yes, without any doubt in my mind, because it's being made by Bungie. And whether we like it or not, whether the hive mind, really focused gamer brains believe it or not, Bungie still has a good name with a lot of gamers. There's still a lot of people who love Destiny, and Marathon will have at least limited success purely because it's a Bungie game, and a bunch of PlayStation gamers are gonna hype it up. and a bunch of Bungie lovers are going to hype it up. Is it going to have sustained success? I would say almost certainly not. I would say it's a almost a guarantee it will not. And we'll just have to see how that plays out. I don't know. It's strange. It's weird, and I think the weirdest part about it, and I think I talk about this every time, is how it's just getting completely ignored by all of the big influencers, the big podcasts, the big journalists. You see barely a peep about this huge, I would argue, drought of first party games coming from PlayStation, albeit it's hard to compare them to Xbox anymore because Xbox has it's like 4 times more studios or something. Like they are very different publishers at this point, but still, for a platform that was known for these like heavy hitter, super big, really impressive first party games. We had like Spider-Man 2 a couple years ago, which probably could have been a PlayStation 4 cross-gen game. Almost all of the exclusive games on PlayStation 5 probably could have been cross-gen games if they allowed them to be. I understand why they didn't, but they could have been, almost certainly. I still don't know if we've seen a game that definitely couldn't have been on PS4. Even Astrobot probably could have been. I assume Death Stranding 2, and maybe Yotai, but probably not, will be games that have taken such a big step that they couldn't do it. But, you know, I don't know. It's just weird. I'm glad Herman Hulst thinks that Marathon is going to do better, but we'll see, man. I played Marathon for a bit and it was bad. Like, it was just not a very fun experience. It felt completely soulless. Revenge of the Savage Planet creative director Alex Hutchinson has attacked Game Pass. Their new game has just come out and it has garnered lower than expected sales. And he went to some random game journalist website and did an interview. And it's really funny because apparently he's like said things alluding to the idea of like our game's gonna be like the next Grand Theft Auto, like success wise and stuff. It's like, bro, you are nuts. I think Grand Theft Auto 5 has sold like 200 million copies or some crap. Like, you are not replicating that with your little dinky game, I promise. Now, this Revenge of the Savage Planet, I forget what the first one was called. It reviewed really well. People really liked it. It had a little controversy around it, but it wasn't too bad. This situation is so strange. So this game was a day one Game Pass game, and he's basically blaming its low sales on that. There's a lot of things to know about this situation. One, tons of games that have come out on Game Pass day one have still sold extremely well on PlayStation and Steam and other platforms. So even if he feels like it's taken away from Xbox sales, it almost never does with good games like Expedition 33 and a bunch of other games. It didn't hurt the sales on other platforms. It almost certainly hurts them on Xbox for sure. It's also worth remembering that not everyone who has an Xbox has Game Pass. But regardless, my biggest annoyance with this is that he's the head of that studio. He's the leader of the studio. He and the other people in leadership agreed to the Game Pass deal. He did not have to put their game on Game Pass. No one forced him to. What he did is he signed a deal with Game Pass, agreed to a number that they probably paid them out, which most of these devs seem to use it for development costs. And, a big chunk of their development costs was almost certainly paid for by Xbox for this Game Pass deal. And now in hindsight, he probably just wishes he would have asked more because his game isn't selling, because it's probably just not that, it's kind of a niche game. The first one reviewed really well, but I don't think it sold crazy. And now we're in the second situation with this new game where like, it'll probably sell okay, but he's like telling people like, no game dev should ever sign a Game Pass deal for a year until a year after the game is out. And it's like, dude, you didn't have to. You could have taken your own advice. Like, you could have done that. It's such a strange story. And it just feels like a dude with sour grapes because he signed a deal with no pressure. He didn't have to do it. No one has to go on Game Pass. You don't have to use Game Pass to play any game. You can buy all of them if you want, or just buy the ones you want. Or you can have Game Pass for a month and then cancel it. Like, no one forces this. So when I was reading through this, and it was so funny, he was the one who, before release even, I saw that he had quote tweeted Shuhei Yoshida's article about how subscriptions are bad. He did that before Gamepad, before his game even came out. So it kind of makes me wonder, like, oh, does he know his game's not really going to be very popular, and he's already setting up blaming Xbox and Game Pass? I don't know. I may or may not have poked the bear a little bit with that to see if he would bite, and I don't know if he did. I never saw anything, but it's just, I just don't. This is such a strange story because he's like complaining or kind of, you know, upset that his game is on Game Pass when he put it on Game Pass. Like, no one did that but him. But you know, these people like this, you know, you ask them to take accountability for their own actions, and it seems like a lot of them are incapable of it. Look at the Splitgate 2 studio owner slash Nepo baby. Tom Warren is alleging in his paywalled blog, for some reason, even though he writes for a games journalist website, I don't understand, that the Xbox handheld, the first party one, not the Asus one that we just saw, is essentially canceled, and further handheld gaming consoles for Xbox will likely be made by third party hardware vendors. I'm going to be honest, I don't always take Tom Warren very seriously. He has a very throw a lot of stuff at the wall and see what sticks method of games journalism. So he gets hits on things, and he's right sometimes. He is wrong a lot of the time. So kind of take that for what it is. This also doesn't seem like original reporting. We just recently heard that they had at least kind of delayed or indefinitely delayed the first party handheld as they focus more on the OS and the operating system to make Windows 11 or Windows in general, whatever they call it in the future, a better handheld operating system to match Steam OS, which people pretty much universally love. This kind of just seems like an extension of that story, to me at least. And especially because I'm under the impression that the team that was working on the handheld is also a part of Microsoft that was making the whatever their books are called, their own like tablet slash laptops, and I think that series is going away. So there's a very good chance that the team that was making this handheld may just not be around or may not be around for long, or may be focused on other things. So it would kind of make sense if they continue making their own, you know, desktop consoles, the next Xbox, that they would kind of let other companies make handheld hardware to use their software on it. And I wouldn't even be surprised if one day we maybe even see a third-party desktop, you know, console for Xbox. It doesn't seem all that crazy to me. President and CEO of Sony states that they are doubling down on their PlayStation hardware focus, despite others in the industry taking new tactics and strategies. This isn't all that surprising. PlayStation very much has a 20-year-old strategy when it comes to how they run PlayStation, and it's still working. You know, even though I was talking about how they're not putting out games, and there's all this like weird stuff going on with their hardware and how they're, you know, counting, you know, monthly active users and all that stuff now. They've still sold like 80 million PlayStation 5s. Like, so why wouldn't they keep doing that? Now, we know that PlayStation 5, though, or at least consoles in general, aren't these big money makers, even though, you know, we're under the impression that they are making some kind of profit on the hardware. It's never very much. And they make all their money off selling games on that hardware, which they seemingly sell a lot of games on their hardware. And they have 80 million units out there. We're also under the impression now that there's finally more PS5 players than PS4. Enough people have adopted the 5 that they are finally, you know, getting past that. There's a reason Call of Duty was still making last gen versions of their games, and maybe that will slowly start to kind of fall off. Yeah, this isn't surprising. If anything, it just reinforces my kind of statement for years now that Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox are companies taking completely different routes to their future. I would argue that Nintendo and PlayStation are similar in that they're still focusing on exclusives. They're still focusing on hardware, where Xbox is focusing on services and hardware being an option and things like that, as well as using other platforms to sell their games. You know, PlayStation is very much, you know, they're dabbling in the PC market. They don't seem completely convinced. They've kind of dabbled in the streaming and all that stuff. Nintendo is just doing the buy a Switch 2 and play our games at full price kind of move. Uh, and this just reinforces it. So I don't expect things to change drastically anytime soon. And really, it kind of makes logical sense. Why would PlayStation change what they're doing? They're finding success. Are they doing what's going to be popular in the future? Who knows? But I don't think they care because their bank account is full of money, or at least it should be if they weren't canceling games and shutting down studios every month. But I'm sure they'll get that figured out. Kind of hitting a rundown here. Nintendo Switch 2 has sold 3.5 million units in the first 4 days. This isn't that surprising at all. There's more consumers than ever for gaming. Almost every new launch is going to have, more sold, especially if it's a good console. Switch 2 appears to be a good console for a lot of people, so it sold a lot. I still think, though, we'll see a huge dive. The Switch 1 was out for so long, and it had so much appeal for so long, sold 150 million units or whatever. I don't believe that's going to happen with this one because I still believe this is basically a Switch Pro, and it just doesn't, it's not so much better that you have to get it. And I fully expect that Nintendo and the third party games that come out for Nintendo for the Switch 2, we're going to see cross-gen games for a long time. When you have 150 million customers out there, you continue to sell them software until you absolutely can't. Now, we won't be seeing the third-party games releasing on the Switch 1, but I am very, very willing to bet that we're going to see Switch 1 games, like first-party Nintendo games, release for at least a little bit, or some kind of version of it, or maybe they can stream them or something. I have no idea. But they will not abandon that customer base because it makes them way too much money. Mind's Eye has come out, and it's the I've talked about it a little bit. It's this kind of controversial, like, Grand Theft Auto competitor. At least that's what they want it to be. And it's made in this engine that is kind of, you can kind of use it yourself. It's this like creative game, but then they also it's on its own track now, and it's called something different. Long story short, it seems like it's a hot buggy mess, and that it's like, a la like Cyberpunk 2077 when it came out, but maybe worse. I've seen a few people being like, I actually think it's a lot of fun. But there's also people who will argue that like Cyberpunk didn't have any bugs when it came out. So I try to take the larger kind of voice on this more seriously, and it seems like it's kind of a hot mess. We'll see what happens with it. At least it's not complete vaporware, but it seems like it's kind of close, or at least as close as you can get to it when you're releasing an actual game. So we'll see how that plays out. Bloober has confirmed that they're working on a Silent Hill 1 remake. So after the success of the Silent Hill 2 remake, it's not that surprising at all that they're doing that. And it seems like they're going to do a really good job because they did with 2. SAG-AFTRA, the union that represents voice actors in gaming, has reached a tentative deal with quote-unquote major studios. It would end a years-long strike, and that strike is currently suspended. So those people who are part of that union currently can work with, I believe, the Activisions, the EAs, and things like that, which they haven't been able to for quite a while now. It's been a big deal. Like I said about the Veilguard, they weren't able to do rewrites because those voice actors, for the most part, were not allowed to work. So hopefully that gets worked out and AI doesn't steal all these people's jobs. And then finally, there is a possible Witcher 3 DLC coming. Yes, the game that came out like 10 years ago or whatever, it may be getting DLC in 2026. The idea is that it would likely be made by a third-party studio that was, believe it or not, founded by former CDPR devs. And there's this idea that it would be basically kind of what Virtuous is doing for Cyberpunk, where you would have this third-party studio make a DLC, and it would, I have to imagine, be DLC for Witcher 3 that would essentially lead into Witcher 4, the switch from Geralt to Ciri as the protagonist. I have to imagine it would have something to do with that. For content updates, nothing too big. I'm back from vacation, so I'm hoping to get back on my Mass Effect 3 playthrough and finally get through with that. getting back to making videos. I want to do a video just about the Schreier article and what's going on with BioWare and Mass Effect and Dragon Age. I may end up just doing a podcast on the Mass Effect Hypecast for that, so keep an eye out. There's also other stuff to talk about there. This podcast will keep going, and we'll just kind of keep doing our thing. So the summer is always a little crazy for me because I've got the family here during that time, but I still make time to do the things I want, and hopefully I can be on and doing the streaming, the podcasting, and all of that as necessary. And that's where I'm going to wrap this one up. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, and subscribe to the Bond Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members and or Twitch subscribers. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and all of my other content, please check out the links in the show description. If you have any questions or feedback, comment on Spotify or YouTube. Let me know in my Discord or hit me up on social media at Baunfire or at the Baunfire. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. So until next time.